Hi, I'm Andrew Childers from Tuts Plus, and in this tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to use one of Microsoft Excel's most powerful formulas, VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP is a formula that we can use to match data from two different lists together. Let me show you what I mean. So on the first tab of this workbook, I have a list of employee shifts, and I have the employee ID, their name, and the day and time they worked. But I need to insert their job title here into column F. Now, the good news is that I have a separate worksheet that already has the employee titles on them. So what we have here is the employee ID, name, and job title. If we come back to the Shifts tab, we're going to write a formula in these cells so that we pull in the job title based on the employee ID that's over here. So let's go ahead and get started. Now that I've clicked into the cell, I'm going to go ahead and press the equal sign on my keyboard and then start typing VLOOKUP. Now once I do that, it'll appear from the drop-down list, and I usually just like to double-click on it to get started. Now the first thing that we need to do in a VLOOKUP formula is tell Excel which is the primary key. And what I mean by primary key is the bit of data that we're going to use for the match. So what I'll do is go ahead and click on the employee ID over here. And this is basically saying, use whatever cell is over here to actually perform the match. So basically, both lists of data need to have this bit of data in it to perform the match. Now, after I click on that, I'm going to add a comma to start on the next part of the formula. And now, while I'm still working in the formula, I'm going to switch over to the employee title worksheet and show it that this is the list of data that I want to match from. Now, if all you have is the list on the sheet, what I like to do is just click and drag and highlight all three of those columns. And that basically selects all of the data. If we add more data here to the bottom, it'll also pick it up in the lookup. So now we've shown Excel which we want to pull from when we do the VLOOKUP. Now we're going to go ahead and type the next part of the formula by adding another comma. Now the next part of the formula, which Excel is kind of bolding as we work our way through it, is the column index number. And what this means basically is the number column that we want to insert the data from. So if we choose column 1, it'll just put the ID in again. If we put in a 2, it'll pull the second column and put the employee's name in. Or if we put a 3, it'll pull the job title in, which is what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and put a 3 right here. Now finally, I'll add another comma, and I always leave the last part of this formula set to false. Now basically that just has Excel look for a precise and exact match, and I almost always recommend doing that. So now I've got the whole formula typed, and once I press enter, it takes us back to the first tab, and it's now inserted that employee's job title. Now of course, we don't have to go through and rewrite that formula over and over again. I can just put my mouse cursor in the lower right hand corner of this cell and double click on it. It autofills all of the other cells with the formula that we need, and now we have all of the employee titles inserted into our spreadsheet. Now that we've filled in the employee titles, let's move on to a bit more complex example. I'm going to jump over to the ingredient orders tab, and in this case we have a list of orders for our restaurant that we need to insert the supplier, supplier phone number, and supplier delivery day into. On the next tab, I have what's called the supplier list, which basically has the list of ingredients and who supplies them to us. And we have a number of different types of data here that we'll insert into the spreadsheet. So let's jump back to the ingredient orders tab and write our first. So the common key between the two spreadsheets is the ingredient, so that's what we're going to use to match. So again, I'll start off with a VLOOKUP, double click on it to open it up, and the first thing we need to give Excel, remember, is the lookup value, which is the ingredient. This is the primary key that's in both spreadsheets. Now I'll go ahead and add a comma and jump over to the supplier list. And you'll notice here that I want to leave the formula open while I do that. I'm still working in the cell. Now I jump over to supplier list, and we need to show Excel where the lookups are. Now in this case, we have this little header on the top of our table, so we can't just grab the whole columns. So what I'll do instead is kind of click and drag and highlight just the table itself with the data that we want to use. Now at this point, I want to show you something that'll make sense a little later. You just need to press F4 on your keyboard, and it'll add these little dollar signs into the formula up here. And that's what's called an absolute reference. As we move and drag down our formula, it'll still work because we've locked in the exact cells where our lookup data is. Now I'll go ahead and type comma, and now I need to give Excel the column index number. And since we're working from the left here, the ingredient is in the first tab, but we want to put the supplier's name in. So that's column 2. So I'm just going to go ahead and type 2, another comma, and then false. So now we've already written that whole VLOOKUP in just a few seconds. It's gone ahead and pulled the supplier in here, and when I double click on the handle in the lower right corner, it fills in the supplier for every other ingredient according to that supplier list. Now that we've worked the supplier name in, let's go ahead and get the supplier phone number in as well. Now the good news is we don't have to rewrite the VLOOKUP formula all over again. With cell F5 selected, I'm just going to go ahead and hit Control C on my keyboard, move to the right, and press Control V. Now at first you'll see that the formula is not working at all. We get this nasty NA error. And if we click up in the formula bar, you can see why that is. When we slid the formula to the right, it's no longer working because it's trying to use the quantity as the lookup key. I can just come up to the formula bar and change C5 back to B5, and when I press enter, it's now working. But by working, I only mean that the lookup is working, not that we're getting the right field. We don't need the supplier now, we need the supplier phone number. So if I jump back to the supplier list, you can see here that the phone number is in this last column, which is column number 7. So if I come back to where my formula is written, all I have to do is change this 2 in the formula to the number 7. Remember that this part of the formula is asking us which column do we want to pull in data from, and we just need to move that to the right so that it pulls in the supplier phone number instead. Once I press enter, you'll see that it's pulling it through perfectly. And I'll just double click on the handle again to pull it down to all other cells. Now finally, we'll just repeat this process one more time to the supplier delivery day. As I copy and paste it over, it breaks the lookup, so I'll just move that back to the ingredient, or you could type it up in the formula bar. Now when I press enter, it's pulling the phone number through, but we want the supplier delivery day. If I jump back to the supplier list, the delivery day is in column 5. So if I come back and look at my formula again and change the 7 to a 5, it's now pulling the delivery day through correctly. And I'll double click on that to pull the formula down again. And that's about it. In just a few seconds, we took one formula that we wrote and adapted it to pull through all the different data that we needed. Thanks so much for joining me.